the technology systems here in Kenya, I can feel the same pattern I felt when I was in the
Mm-hmm.
NGO system. It's not that I'm completely denying the fact that it's important to get funding, but if that funding's intention is to create a sense of not solve a problem, I have a problem with that. If a business is created to create a sense of dependency, I have a problem with that. We must take ownership and realize that we also allow this to happen.
Today, I'm speaking with Joy Njeri, a systems doula and regenerative economy advocate who's based in Kenya. She helps communities reclaim power, reimagine systems, and more broadly, help each of us remember who we are. She's particularly focused on challenging the dependency models that she's witnessed in the NGO world and rightfully pushes back against Western venture capital extraction in Kenya that too often replicates colonial dynamics. Her work asks difficult but necessary questions. Why do white foreigners still receive the lion's share of funding to solve problems in Africa? And how do we begin to undo the legacy of Western supremacy in philanthropy and investment, and ultimately build models that return power and agency to local communities? She's also co-authoring a book called Seismic Questions, and she's an active contributor to the donor economics community, currently helping shape this year's Global Donut Day. At the heart of her work is a real weaving of indigenous wisdom with contemporary systems thinking. And she invites us to imagine, how might we create businesses that strengthen rather than extract from the communities that they serve? Here's my conversation with Joy. Hey Joy, thank you so much for joining me on the Moral Footprint podcast today. Looking forward to learning about how power, investment and legacy are playing out in African business development. We've had some good chats before this recording, so let's jump right in. You've worked across the humanitarian sector and the corporate world before stepping into your work with business. So what did that experience teach you, and how did you end up where you are today?
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege being here. I mean, we met before and I really love your energy and I think we bounce off a
Yeah, the
lot of
feeling's mutual.
commonalities. So I started off by studying sociology. That was where I came from, sociology and political science. And so when I got into the job market, my first job was an NGO, was a project, which was basically funded coffee, working with coffee farmers. So got that opportunity. And then after that, went into civil society, where my biggest interest became working with communities and advocacy work, issues of human rights. After that, I took a break and started my own business. And then in the curiosity of wondering how are people getting along with business, I got to work with corporate L'Oreal for a while and then took another break after some time. I've had so many breaks, but it's also been important for me because I'd had to reset because of questioning why am I doing what I'm doing. So right now I'm actually working with issues of systems change. So combining my work with communities and policy work and then bringing it together with business because they're all interconnected. So working around systems change, you can't touch one and avoid the other. So it's how do we bring all that together to see the changes we want to see. So that right now is my main area of interest and work. And that is after a sabbatical for like 4 years, trying to figure out what I wanted. Yes. So after L'Oreal, I took a sabbatical for 4 years and I was like, I need to slow down, which I think is what a lot of people actually need to do. Question, why am I doing what I'm doing and what is it that I have learned from my previous experiences? And it doesn't have to be a long sabbatical. It just has to be a conscious way of living, which I think is important.
That's interesting because you're saying you needed that time for reflection of what did I learn from that experience and what can I take with it? So if we go back to when you said you were working in civil society on human rights issues, presumably you initially thought this is going to drive a lot of impact and I'm going to change the world with this type of work. And how did that experience shape your view on trying to drive change?
I ticked all societal boxes. I ticked all boxes I was told. Get a job, get a good job, save the world. And that was my initial idea because my heart has always been in people and I love working with people and seeing people progress. And working in civil society and partly NGO world, what it allowed me to see was the question was I really doing what I really wanted to do? Because how we would leave people would leave me questioning much more than when I came in. And I felt like we left majority of the people worse
Wow.
than we found them. And what I mean by this is that a lot of the times we solved a certain problem, not looking at it in a holistic way, because a lot of the donor funding is aligned to a specific project. And so if it is policy, maybe it's issues of just human rights for the day, that's what would happen. And that's how you'd come in. But you'd go to a community that is hungry, dealing with issues of dependency, and you wouldn't touch any of that. And so
Like
when
just
you
a
bring
narrow
in the
view of
money,
it.
exactly. Yeah, and also not seeing where the real issues are coming from. And what that would do is that the questioning of sitting back and asking, are we really solving the issues that we are intending on doing? And will what the work we are doing in this moment progress to help solving the issue? And what I found is that we sat and yes, did what
Yeah.
we needed to do. We ticked the boxes. We took the photos. We wrote the reports. But the way we left most of the people, we left them in a state of dependency. And I'll give an example, for instance, when we worked with the post-election violence victims, for instance, a lot of them, because we were working with the justice system, hope that they would get reparations. A lot of them are fully dependent. And I remember one time we were working with someone and she mentioned this. She said, let us give them nice food because we don't think they're gonna get what they're
Wow.
meant to get. And I remember I sat back and asked myself, so why are we doing what we are doing? We're spending
Yeah.
so much money in traveling, so much money in all these things, yet we're leaving people worse than they found them, knowing that this will never go through. So it's that cycle of sitting with them and bringing hope that is not actually really solving the
Do you think that's
problem.
because
Yeah.
when the NGOs are trying to solve a problem, they're looking at it from the outside in as well, aren't they? And presumably the funding, the money is
Yeah.
coming from the West or Western world.
Yes.
And they are also setting almost like constraints of this is what you should do. People coming from the outside to try and solve something without actually seeing the full systemic, holistic view, as you said.
Yeah. I think for a lot of the projects I remember us writing, we would sit and write and it will be attached to a certain procedure and a way of doing things. And ideally, when you look back at an institution, a lot of the institutions had a lot of, I would call, interest. So for instance, if it's policy and there's a policy they're trying to push forward in Kenya or in East Africa, we would see certain funding start trickling in. And so what we would probably do is try align our projects into
To
that
make sure you get the
space so
money.
that we could get the funding. Exactly. So let me give a hypothetical example. Let's say it's gender issues. That is where the money is. For whatever reason, they're pushing certain kind of agenda around that space. So what we would do would be like, oh, a lot of NGOs would know, oh, maybe the US is giving a lot of money on gender. So what do? We look for projects with our communities that are aligned to gender. Because the sustainability of an organization is based on the money they have. Because it's we sustain the problem, we get money, we get to employ people, we get to earn.
You have to almost work in that dependency as an NGO.
Exactly. So there's no exit into what we're trying to solve. So there's no problem solving here. It's not we're trying to solve a problem. We're just trying to fix it for the moment and hopefully we get much more going on. And that was my feeling. I don't know if there may be other people who feel different, but generally that's how I felt. I felt like a lot of the communities we tried to support, a lot of them were left in a space of dependency. And it is because of the lot of what I think is the idea that they felt like we need someone from outside to come solve our problem and not look at the why is this problem within this community and why is it affecting you the way it's affecting you, but also what kind of assets do you have within the community that would help you solve the problem. Because think about it. I know you and me, we at times we talk around around psychology. When you think about when you go to a therapist or a psychologist, what happens? They know all they need to do is mirror you, because the
Yeah, that's a great
solution
point.
that you need to be able to identify the problem that you're going through is where is within. You already know the problem you're going through. You know where it comes from. Maybe someone said something to you, and that has been the reason why you are doing what you're doing. And for a lot of communities, what I found is that they are wealthy
Yeah,
in wisdom. They have a lot of indigenous wisdom, but they're told that that is not good enough. It's the white collar, it's it's this way of living, it's this way of doing things that is the right way. And so right now, let's
sure.
even give an example of infrastructure. When you think about the mad houses right now, someone in America is winning an award out of creating a mad house and as an architecture. But that has been in our cultures for years.
Yeah, it's not a new solution.
But for them to put it out there because we are told it's not good enough, and everyone right now is struggling to build a modern
Yeah,
and losing everything they have to try and fit into that space. And the feeling of I'm never gonna make it, I'm never good enough, I'm never wealthy or successful enough, I don't live a good life, I'm poor, yet I can be able to supply my own food because I have a piece of land, yet I have a community around me that supports me. But that's not what we utilize as when we were working with them. We utilize the idea of you don't have, so you need me to come and bring something for you. So what happens? They're fully dependent on me.
yeah. It's almost like this sort of very Western white supremacist rhetoric of what should be defined as success,
Hmm.
materialist success. It's not looking at, as you say, this indigenous wisdom and the wisdom of community and things that don't have a monetary value to them. There's this focus on, well, you need to have this type of house and it's going to be better for you, when actually it's going to cause more
Yeah,
dependencies because it's coming from the outside.
exactly.
You've spoken about how
Hmm.
the solutions come from within the people and the community, but there's still the truth that global south and at the African continent, so much of the resources have been extracted. And in a way, I presume that dependency is because so much has already been taken and it rightfully needs to go back to where it's from. So how do you wrestle with this idea of reparations, but also communities need to have autonomy and feel empowered to solve their own problems?
I think for me, I look at it in two phases. I see it as, because these are patterns we are seeing. And the truth is that we only lose what we allow
Mm,
ourselves to lose. Because if you really think about it, is that you could extract my gold, but at the end of the day, I have the right. The gold is still mine because I can stand up and there's a justice system. There's a whole system created that I can say, you actually extracted from me and this is my gold. And we can see that happening in the West African countries like Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger. And what is happening right now, and why I say it's a two-faced thing, there's a place where the extractor needs to take responsibility, but also there's a place where the people who allowed that to happen need to start taking responsibility. And that's why one of my biggest interest, we need to realize we are not what we have been told we are.
yeah, almost like
We
to
are not
reclaim that power.
not enough. Exactly. But it has to start from here and here.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's where the biggest issues have basically, that's where the pattern has still remained as it is, because we have believed we don't have the capacity. And I'll be very honest, the communities I work with, even right now, like I shared with you, Temple Art, they're extremely wealthy. They are they are flourishing right next to the biggest dump site in
Yeah.
this country. Yet they've created such a regenerative space. No funding, no people doing stuff, just the community coming together. And I'm not saying money is not important. It is important. but it is not the center of everything we think it is. And that's how we've been taught. So everyone has this addiction towards money and the value of what that money is, because I'm only valuable if I have money.
That's really interesting, because it's almost the same way that many people are also indoctrinated in the Western world, that your non-monetary sources of value don't really count, like caregiving, your community. That doesn't matter. What you need is, you need more money. You need to be able to buy a nice car, do all these things with money.
Yeah.
As you say, Tempo is a project that's right next to the biggest dump site in Kenya. But what you're saying is this is a flourishing community and it's actually very successful. Can you talk about how they came to be and what the implications are then for other organizations who are trying to escape this very financialized view of success?
So when I met Tempo, it was through other communities meeting up at one event we had, all of us together. And I remember when I met them, I was really excited just being with them. Tempo was started 30 years ago, right in the middle of a slum area, right? Like I said, right next to the biggest dump site. And what happened, it's a man called Moses who started Tempo. And he used to watch the Kung Fu movies. They would go in halls and watch that. So what would happen is that he started practicing and watching how they would do their, respect and the discipline these people would have practicing. And he thought that's what we need here. So he started trying to flip and do the Kung Fu moves. And slowly by slowly, he started bringing in kids. So kids would see him and come, and he would start asking them, when you come here, act like this is our temple. So there's a level of discipline, and he would train them with flipping. Then actually, he would be practicing, and as he gets better, he's teaching the children. And what happened is that when he started, he was alone. And there were him and a friend of his after some time. And then slowly kids started coming to him. But he was such a disciplinarian. I remember they were telling me, if you came to temple, you had to bow and be so respectful. And then we would do practice for 1 hour and then run back home. And because this is a slum area and that is around the need, you can imagine most parents in the slum area would be like trying to protect their kids, because they would be like, where are you coming from at this point? What are you doing? There's crime, you'd be killed, something would happen. And a lot of them actually got into problems with their parents. And so slowly by slowly, this started becoming a thing. Community children started coming in, they started changing their lives, and the focus started becoming acrobatics. So out of the Kung Fu, they started practicing. Yes. And so a lot of them, once they were picked by the president noticed them, or someone related to the president noticed them, and they started going for events, for public events. And that's how they started. And slowly they started traveling around the world. And now that became their space. So when they started, they did nothing about the space, but that became their safe haven. Right now, they have almost 1,000 people outside the country abroad because of acrobatics. Not even education. And right now in the community, they train almost 200 to 300. Moses is no longer with them because he got an injury that wouldn't allow him to now do the acrobatics. But I remember we brought him back and we were like, tell us more about what you were thinking, why you started this. And he was like, I didn't think it would grow into anything. They didn't even start planting trees before by that time. So by the time Moses left, they were like, this is our space, let us take care of it. So they started planting food, they started permaculture. Like if you watch the video, you notice like there's a lot of permaculture they've done in the community. And this was a lot from the wisdom they have learned. A lot of them, remember, they've come from the rural areas into the centers looking for opportunities, or their families came in looking for opportunities. So now, somehow that knowledge has been transferred into the urban center. When you look at that, you realize how much wealth is already coming in that is not yet being utilized. So they do their dance, but we still notice the dependency mindset. Because remember, they're living in a slum area, and as much as they've traveled, they still come back home because of the sense of belonging. this is home. They still come back and do the practice where they used to be. And so this basically starting to question, and that's what I've seen when I met them. So how we started working with them was through the donut day event for last year. We were like, we need to showcase, because they're the perfect donut story to tell. They're not perfect, but they're getting there, and you can see where they're looking at the planetary boundaries and they're looking at the social foundation. As much as they're struggling, there's still stories that we can tell about what is still happening in the community.
It was actually quite emergent. Like, it wasn't this top-down directive of this is what we need to happen, we're going to completely overhaul the land. This project, rooted in community, gave people almost like a feeling of belonging and ownership, which then enabled the permaculture. It enabled the, I guess, how do you think other organizations, whether they're in Africa or the Western world, how can they also maybe embody that idea of focusing on local community and taking ownership of your local land? That for me is what's so fascinating about this.
Yeah. It's interesting because even for me, that was the question. That was the question, is how do we get businesses, and how do we get, because I'm a strong believer that businesses, when you look at the analogy of a body, the analogy of the systems that we've created, they're those things that cause transitions, like they allow things to flow. They're not really the organs, but they do allow things to flow. And without them, we might not have life. It's like the mycelium that we never see. And I feel like businesses come into that space when we think about when we think about society.
Sorry, there was a little bit of a delay there. So I think you were saying about how business is almost like
I'm seeing
a body or like a collective structure that enables something that I guess individuals cannot accomplish by themselves. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I did hear you just that
Hello?
moment, but so you were able to hear what I said about just reconfirming what your point was?
Yeah. So basically, I
Sorry,
think
there's a real
the idea
delay.
of businesses, even when you look at the indigenous,
Yes.
yeah, there's a real delay. Let me see if I can move. Oh, much better. So for me, I believe that businesses, they solve the problems in society, because that's how businesses emerge. Ideally, even in the indigenous system, there would be someone who's making shoes if the community was using shoes.
Yeah.
So like the Maasais, for instance, they used to use certain leather shoes, and they would be made by a specific person because that was a need of the community. So businesses help the transaction, help solve problems in communities. But I think the thing that is happening right now is that we have just linearly started thinking about businesses in just one way. The business right now is only the things that basically bring a lot of money, the ones that scale, the ones that I know. And that's how we are seeing businesses. And it's okay, it's still part of the system. But if these businesses then were able to localize, because I like what Ra said. He said that when you're not able to actually think about the context and the place that you're in, then you're basically ideally bringing in coloniality,
You're imposing
patterns, which is
totally,
actually what we are seeing right now.
I was finding
Exactly.
great about what you were saying is that's almost like how businesses should be based on what people need. They should be rooted in a community or, like
Yes.
a group of people who are like, this is what we need. And then people solve that problem rather than almost starting off with, how can I make money? I'm going to come up with a random idea. I have no idea if people want it. And I'm going to impose that on them and hope that I can become a billionaire. I mean,
Think about fast fashion.
Exactly. And fast fashion ultimately,
And now the problem we're
reduces the
having,
quality and makes everyone worse off. I
yeah. But also the technology systems here in Kenya. I can feel the same pattern I felt when I was in the NGO system. It's not that I'm completely denying the fact that it's important to get funding, but If that funding's intention is to create a sense of dependency, not solve a problem, I have a problem with that. If a business is created to create a sense of dependency, I have a problem with that. And I think it's that part of where we must take ownership and realize that we also allow this to happen. Because for me, and I won't lie, for me, my unlearning has been really hard because I had to sit with myself and ask myself, like, why am I starting? Like right now, I'm starting off this idea of working with businesses and working with communities and trying to integrate those two concepts together. How do I do that? I'm still put in the system where I need to get funding or I need to get resources to do this thing. And I have to sit with myself and question, how do I want to do it in the sense that I do not create a sense of dependency, not just for me, but also for my
Yeah, and I guess the
community.
flip side, sorry, go ahead.
And it's becoming a little bit, I mean, the truth is that that means we have to be able to stand out. I've seen a few people actually out of that questioning. It has allowed me the opportunity to find people who are actually doing that. There's a there are guys called grassroots economics, and what they're doing, they're working with community, and there's commitment pulling around the work they're doing, and they're able to utilize the ask within a community and use that to transition. But even if the assets outside, people are able to, I don't want to use the word trade, but pull within the systems that for people who are willing to not cause a sense of dependency, but also allow themselves to help each other, understanding that when I help you, in return, what happens is that I get the same help from someone
I
else.
love
So
that.
it's a cycle that keeps on
Yeah,
growing
and
and going.
I
Yeah. And so when you think about it, it's even in the indigenous communities, if you think about it.
sorry, I was going to say, when you talk about this idea that you give something to someone and then you ultimately end up benefiting from someone else, you're almost saying that it's kind of like a reciprocity, that
Exactly.
you're almost like giving without the expectation of that particular person to give back, but you know that everyone benefits because everyone gets what they need ultimately. Is that how the grassroots economics initiative works?
Yeah, that's how it works. It's basically commitment pooling. I'll give you an illustration of how the
Yeah,
communities
yes,
used to
please.
work initially before. And what used to happen is, I know, like now they're working with a community in the Taita community in Kilifi in the coastal area. But I'm from the
Hmm.
Kikuyu space and the Maasais. And what would happen is that in Maasai, the women will build the house. In Kikuyus, people would come together and build the house. It would be the women, the children, and the men, all of them at times together would come to take part in building the house. And so what would happen is that we would build my house first, and then I would commit to building your house, or maybe you already have a house, you need us
I
to farm
see.
your land because you don't have a lot of hands to help you, but I have. So you came to my help when I needed the house, and then I commit back to you and say, okay, so now you help my house, you already have a house, what can I do for you? And we agree
Mm.
and say, I want you to help me with uh, I'll be plowing my land in the next 2 months. Would you come and help me at that point? And we commit to that. And that's how people used to
Of
basically work
course, yeah.
together. And what you'd find is that maybe yeah, I have a source of water and you don't, but you have some land which is greater than mine and you're farming something that I don't have. And that would be the trade people would have within. And so it was that commitment that I commit to you in one way and you commit to
I
me in
see. So
another
yeah,
way.
so you're
And I feel
giving,
like that
sorry, I was about
sort
to say,
of,
you kind of, you're giving what each of you are able to give,
yeah,
and in a way then everyone gets more from it, because you're, it's essentially how, as you say, markets have run and how communities have exchanged what they needed for
yes,
for millennia basically. And it's the complete opposite
yeah,
of how mainstream, very westernized business works, which is give me money and then I'll use that money for something else. It's not based on how can we actually help each other as humans.
yeah, exactly. think about what is happening in Kenya, where there is a lot of Kenyan businesses, and I'll say the tech world businesses, are run by people who are not Kenyans, for instance. And it's because you are more preferred if you're white. If me and you were working together, then I would easily get
Yes, you
funding. And they actually say 47,000% times I would get funding just because I have
even
you.
though
And
white people
it's
in
only a
Kenya are
business.
like
Yes,
0.015%, but as you were saying, and you shared the resources, they're getting much more of the actual funding, which is
yes,
so unfair.
yeah. But because if you think about it, it's the perpetration that we are not capable enough. Yet a lot of the ideas and the businesses that you see.
I don't know if you can still hear me, but it's very
Hello?
choppy. I'm really sorry. Do you mind just restarting that sentence because I couldn't hear?
Hello?
Are you still there? Can you hear me now?
Hello?
Can you hear me? Joy, I can see you, but can you definitely hear me?
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
What ab-
It went on
don't
still.
worry.
Sorry.
What about now?
Yeah, much better. I can hear you
Lovely. So I
perfectly.
was
Can you
can
hear
now,
me?
but the last sentence you were saying about I think it was about like the tech ecosystem. I couldn't hear what you were saying. So I don't if you don't mind just like starting that bit again. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So I was saying, if you look at, yeah, no, it's okay. When you look at the business, the tech world, a lot of the problems that are being funded even are not so much. I mean, I've had a lot of tech people say, don't think locally, think globally, because that's where the money is. And yet, when you look at our own society right now, we're dealing with health issues, we're dealing with, I mean, agricultural, we have so many issues that we
Yeah.
can
Right
solve.
there in your
But the
community.
money that is funding this. Exactly. And what power is there if all we are doing, which is the same, it's extractive because that means I am from this home. And other than building my home, I'm building your home, which is already well built out of my resources again. And now you're asking me not to solve my problems. And how you're doing that is you're making it very difficult for me, or you're only funding a certain kind of project that benefits you. And so the issue is that even our government in this point, as I mean, I shared with you, in 2023, a bill that would basically say they would not allow investors if all the companies are not from, I mean, the locals are not the ones running the company. Right now, they removed that
Yes, I saw
bill.
that.
And what you're seeing is that because of, yeah, and because of the desperation of now someone being like, I have this idea and I really want to succeed because we've been told success looks
Essentially
like
Silicon
this,
Valley style.
then that means what will I do? Oh, yeah, they even call us Silicon Valley of
Yeah.
Africa. We
Yeah.
have that name, girl. So, what do you think I'll do as a business person? I studied engineering, for instance. What do you think I want to do? I want to be successful in my space. And if my definition of success is what you have told me, I will always strive to get in that. And what is happening is that a lot of our people, like you see, 70% of the businesses die at the seed
Yeah.
stage. What is that saying? It's not that we're not capable. I mean, Kenyans are smart. Kenyans are so smart. But the problem is we have been told that we are not able the only way for our businesses to succeed is when we allow this foreign person to come in and take over and control what it is that we think we are
Yeah.
solving. And I have a strong, I've not sat in the pitching spaces, but I've talked to a lot of my friends who are in the tech world. And I feel like when a lot of these young people start, because they're young, I won't even lie to you, majority of them are young, are way younger than me. A lot of the people who are in the tech space are actually in their
Yeah.
30s, 20s. And when these people are starting, their desire is to solve a problem.
And then
And as they get into the process of what that looks like in terms of them being able to make this solve.
Sorry, I was going to interject and then there was a delay. So
No
it's just
problem.
because I can't see when your face
Yeah.
is stopping talking. So that's why I keep interrupting you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no problem. And I can't even hear you. So I'm like, okay.
I really hope, I'm
So
sure
this
we can
internet.
edit it so that it looks like we can both hear each. But so you're saying
Yeah.
the young founders, they start with the problem that they're trying to solve, but what you're saying is they quickly realize if we want validation from Western investors, we need to change our viewpoint. And is that what you're saying, that then they kind of drop that almost like homegrown problem and just try to replicate what the sort of Western world defines as like a good startup?
Yeah. And also think about the process of pitching. What do we see them do? They ask you, how can you scale your business? That's the first question. I went to one of those meetings and everyone was asking me about scaling, and I'm just thinking, do you mean I get more communities? Do you mean you want me to bring more people together? And I was like, it's not that I don't know what that means, but the question is, when you ask me about scaling, what exactly does that in society really mean? What does that, how am I supposed to take that as a business person? Like, the only way I am to get funding is when I can be able to triple or quadruple this,
Yeah,
this
this
product I'm
false
selling. And I don't
exponential.
think that's a bad idea because that shows there's a need.
Yes, I was going to say like this.
Yeah. And I'm thinking at times, not all.
Sorry, I'm really sorry for interrupting you. Yes, I
Hello?
was going to
Yes.
say
No, no problem. I think it's the delay.
it is. I was going to say almost like this idea that exponential growth is the only way of doing business. And again, it's not starting with, does that even make sense? Like, why are we all aspiring to that? Because if a business is rooted in community, I mean, Jennifer Hinton, who works in like post-growth business, talks about this concept of like right-sized. You don't have to be global. It could just be,
Yeah.
what's the right size for your business and how does that make the impact that you care about?
Yeah. And also looking at businesses as a living system, because remember, they're integrated in a system. And I feel like that's where we don't see a lot of business people don't see that. And that's why there is a need to understand that there are a couple of businesses that might die in a period of time. Because as they die, we support that death and the rebirth of whatever new. Like right now, we're having, for instance, there's AI. AI has come in. There are a couple of things that will die. The political systems that we're already having right now, Africa, where we are, we know a lot of things needs to die. And that means in that process of death, there will be certain businesses that will need to die. And how do we support that death and also prepare for that death so that they can be a reborn into a new system? Because a new system might need new things.
And what sort of businesses do you think?
And I feel like we don't have that. We don't have that kind of system that looks at businesses as a living system. So there's only one way. All of us need to make profit, and the only way we do make profit is scaling. And that is the only kind of business that will be funded.
Yeah.
And so
And
that what
when
that
you
does for me as a young person.
Sorry, I was just trying to ask a quick question about when you say some businesses need to die,
Yeah.
are you talking about businesses that maybe are either extractive or aren't actually fulfilling people's needs? Or is it just more that some businesses are inevitably going to fall by the wayside due to the rise of AI? Like what sort of businesses do you envision needing to almost like to die in order for a better world to flourish?
I think the idea of death is probably something. I think because of culture, a lot of us, the idea of death is that something needs completely disappear. But what I see, because from my culture, one of the things that we talk about is that when someone dies, they're buried in the ground. And when a child is born, one of the things I remember they would do culturally is they would take the child out and touch the soil and
Lovely.
speak some words because they believed that this child, yeah, came from the
Yeah, which
soil.
is true.
And
Yeah.
that was the reminder. Yeah, and that's the reminder of the death we are talking about, is that you will be, yes, something will go as it was physically seen, but it will need to evolve into something else, into a
I
newborn
see.
something else. And that's the idea. Yes, I think a lot of the idea we have about death is sad. And true, death is sad because you're losing something, but it's the idea of complete disappearing of this thing. And I think it's the evolution of the newness, because that thing goes into the ground, it
Hmm.
brings nutrition to the ground, it brings value. And we're not really saying that there are businesses, and the truth is that there are businesses that will die every single day, even in this country. And I know everywhere in the world, even just thinking about AI or without AI. And I feel like because of that, what that means is that as a system and as people now who are encouraging people to do business, is also to give them that perspective that you might start something, and at times it doesn't need to scale. You just need
Yes.
to solve a problem
And
for that moment and then let it
also this idea of like
go.
evolution, because what you're saying is, yeah, like almost the business itself, it will
Exactly.
never truly go because the resource of it, the skills, the infrastructure may be used for something new.
And what it
Yeah.
has left.
And
Yeah.
can I pick up on,
Yes. That
yeah, can I
exactly.
pick up on something we talked about before where you were saying it's very interesting because there are many
Mm-hmm.
family run small businesses in Kenya and Africa more broadly. They are flourishing, they're not dying, they don't need external investment. And what do you think then can the newer startups, if they're not going to follow this Silicon Valley template of exponential scale, what do you think they can learn from this idea of being resilient and not requiring this huge amount of funding from elsewhere?
I think first of all they need to, and I think it's a personal decision, because the businesses are created
Mm,
by human beings. They're created by people. And so the person themselves needs to evolve, because the business becomes the person. It's a living system. So we are bringing life into this thing that is a reflection at times of who we are. And that's why I keep on going back to, we are responsible for where we are. As much as there are other factors outside that have, yes, either used that against us or have used that, and then we have allowed them to do that. Because the truth is that the businesses that need to happen for this new evolution of Africa, they have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet without so much thinking that the only person who will come and save them is someone who's always extracted
mm,
them, from the countries, from the people for all their lives. And I feel like we first need to own ourselves. We need to lean into who we fully are. And why I'm going back to the individual even before I go into the business, because the business is always a
I love
reflection of
that.
who we are.
And I guess what you're saying here is like the legacies of whether it's colonialism or Western VC practices, they're almost like shaping, aren't they, how Kenyan and African founders see themselves and see their potential, because they're kind of, and you talked about
Exactly.
before this idea of like needing to liberate. I think you called it like liberating the African mind or the African brain, of unlearning that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a process, because it only happens even in counseling, you can never force someone
Hmm.
to come for a therapy session. They have to be willing to identify, I have a problem and I need some help. And the truth is that we have to sit in a space where we realize that we are the only help we are
Yeah,
looking
rather
for.
than seeking something from
Everything
external.
exactly. And I know this is something all Africans know for sure. It is way harder for me to travel within Africa than it is for me to travel outside the world, outside the continent. It is harder for me to trade within my continent. And my question, I've sat in policy spaces, and my question is always, as we are sitting into these spaces, do we really want to say that we do not understand the implications of these things we are agreeing with in terms of what we are living? Because we're the ones living in the same continent. So if you come and steal in my house, It is me one day who will look for that thing you have stolen and be like, I need to buy another one. It will be at my cost. It will be me who will struggle. And I think that's the realization we need to get to, even as we start businesses. Because I feel like in the next few years, I mean, the amount of content creators within Kenya and just Africa who are not being paid by these social media platforms because we are Africans or because we do not amount to the value that other nations, yet we are majority of who use these platforms. And actually, if you think about the trending countries, a lot of them are from Africa. And when you think about it, the question is it that we can't build our own? Is it that we are just tied to this part of who we were told we are, that we can't evolve past that? And I feel like a lot of people are actually questioning that, even in the business space. I've met people who are like, I'm not going for any investment. I'm going to try and build this business by myself. I'm going to figure it out. And the truth is that we need many more people to start doing that. Because if we do that and we are the majority, because I'll tell you for a fact, if someone is following you for what you have and they're willing to invest in it, you're valuable.
Yeah, and what you're saying is it's actually starting, trying
Africa
to
is
build your
valuable.
own success first, and then the other success or the financial investment that you might want in the future will follow that. But it's about almost like leaning on yourself first. Is that sort of what you're saying, that you need to almost like have that sort of bootstrapped approach?
Yeah. And also leaning in ourselves, but also leaning
I
on
love
each
that.
other. I think the one thing we've also lost is a sense of community. And that's why my work around community and my work around bringing businesses to see some of the things they can learn from the community perspective is very crucial for me. Because when you think about even, and that's what I tell some people when I meet people who are in the business space, I tell them there's some classic examples that we will find in the donut economy business who have tried and who are successful, who are actually trying to change the narrative. And they are becoming successful because they're solving problems for the locals. There's a company in India that basically is working with the dump site guys, the people who work at the dump site, the collectors, and the community. So they're integrating. They're not detaching the fact that because they've had to look at the holistic system of the dump site. And I can tell you in Kenya, that's our biggest still issue. The dump site has its cartels, it's controlled in all over the space. The people who work there really struggle. The environment is difficult. And so for me, the question is, how do we get ourselves back into the spaces where we can then realize that there's a lot we can get from each other? We already have the assets we need. What if we were able to control? And because, like we're told, I've worked with coffee farmers, and I'll tell you for a fact, a lot of the coffee farmers don't even enjoy the best coffee. Some of them have been, even tea. Some of them have not enjoyed the best coffee because it's taken away. And when I was working with them, they were working, most of the coffee used to go to Starbucks. And I can tell you for a fact, we've never tasted Starbucks even here in Kenya. But then the question is, if I'm going to do this to serve that person, and yet that farmer, his home would not be able to produce sustainable food for them.
Wow.
And so all their coffee, they would have land where they would just be planting coffee, but not be able to plant food. And that's exactly what we're doing even with our businesses. We are giving away our resource and we're sleeping hungry, yet we are the ones who are going to again go back to ask for food that we have already given. And that's what they're going to bring back or even give us the worst. And for me, that's what I see, the cycle between the NGO space, where we are creating even dependency right now in the business space, where it's no longer solving a problem for its people and they can be able to sustain that. It is me creating something that then makes you more dependent on me. So then I have control over
And
you. Because the next thing is Africa has the highest population. It's going to have the highest median population who are 19 years, who that means the labor spaces will be filled with Africans.
yeah. And I was also thinking as you were talking, when you were giving some examples of businesses doing well, it was
Yeah.
about this idea of like bringing the social and the environmental benefits together, that they're two sides of the same coin and not ignoring one aspect of that. And I
Yeah.
think maybe for your role as a systems doula, it's just, for me, it's so inspiring because we also, the term doula is obviously about birthing and it's about serving, isn't it? Your role is really about how to help people in Kenya almost like birth those new ways of doing business. And so I'd love to hear is there anything that you're working on currently that you'd love to share in that context? And yeah, just a bit more about that vision of really birthing new systems.
Yeah. I think for me, when I look at, because my main work is in communities, working with communities, but because of that experience, you can't take away that even within communities, there are businesses and businesses are going to emerge. And what I feel is that a lot of businesses, just like the way we say nowadays, there's nature and then there's the human race. Yet human race is part of nature. And if we saw ourselves as part of nature, it would reshape how we build. It would reshape how we connect with the earth and how we connect with the trees and every part of environment, the rivers, everything. Because if we are part of them, we would treat it different. It's the same way when you say, my children are part of me or my dog is part of my house. How you treat it is very different from the way you see a stray
And
dog. Outrightly. And so what I'm seeing is that for me, what has happened is business have separated themselves from community. And that's why we're having most of the problems we're having. That's why they're so detached from what is even happening in the environment. Part of policy work, it's so hard to get it through when the people in business are not participating. But they're not participating because they do not see themselves as part of that system. And so for me is to try and remind them and remind all of us, because I'm also doing business. So I
you
have
have
to
to
also remember that
embody those.
it's doing it exactly. It's remembering if the system around me does not thrive. And I can tell you right now, even when you look at Kenya, because of the bad political system, businesses are failing. And they're not failing because they're not successful. They're failing because the political system has an impact on them. And in the same way, if businesses detach themselves from communities around them, when communities around them are having issues and war and crime and stuff, guess who it
It's going to
affects?
affect their bottom line.
Them. And I feel like that exactly. And also them realizing that as they build, it will be more beneficial to them if they were able to also include in their policies, in their part of thinking, the communities they're living around, the context they're in. What can they solve in that context? It might not be part of their business, but it might be something they can do and bring an impact in their environment. Because if the environment is doing well, somehow human beings do well too. And then that impacts the work they're doing. Their well-being will impact the work. And for me, that's my hope. That's my hope because I've worked in all these systems and I'm like, there has to be a connection around. And this is where I see my greatest, what I can bring in terms of what I have learned. We don't have all the answers, but we have to start bringing these different places that have been fragmented, because remember also when you're able to isolate people, then you have control over them. That's what they did in colonization. That's why there are a lot of concentration camps. That's why they would take the women away and the men
to make
away,
them weaker.
because when you're not together, what happens? Exactly, exactly. And I feel like that's what is even happening in the business world. So bringing them together back with community and bringing them back together with what is happening within them and the
Mm,
environment around them. So that is
that's
my hope. And
beautiful.
that is what I'm hoping that I can be
Yeah,
able to
and what I
achieve.
love
Yeah.
about that as well is we started off this conversation about almost like a negative form of dependency of, people feeling dependent and not being able to sort of get out of that trap. But what you're saying is actually the solution is businesses
Yeah.
realizing they're the ones that are dependent on people and environment. And so that's like a really lovely way that you've sort of flipped that.
Exactly.
Do you have time to go over by a few more minutes?
Yeah. Yes, 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 sure. It's interesting because one of my best phrases is remembering we are the drop in the ocean and yet we are
Mm.
the ocean. We're so interconnected that the whole thing we're talking about, how the world is moving, is because of the decision I, as a drop of water, decide to make. If all the drops in the ocean decided we're never gonna move, and we're gonna sit where we are or sit away, depart from each other, imagine how the ocean
Yeah.
would be. We'll probably not have an ocean.
Yeah, and I also would love to raise a point about that because, obviously I'm sat here in England. We talked about before. I'm from the hometown of Cecil
Yes,
Rhodes, who was one of the biggest colonizers of parts of Africa, and of course that then gives me complex history
yes,
and a legacy that I carry, and also I guess shapes my responsibility. So
yeah,
almost
yeah,
me as that drop in the ocean, not close to you, but there's still my actions and my how I take responsibility for that past also impacts you. So from
yes.
your perspective, how do you think people
Mm.
in the Western world or the global north, what would real solidarity look like to you for sort of African companies, or how do we get away from this colonial dynamic that many Western businesses are falling into? How can individual people doing business help sort of reshape that when they're outside of Africa, yet just, of course, have that responsibility?
I love that question. Thank you so much. It's such an interesting question because um it's it's the question of what does
Mm,
self-responsibility look like for everyone. I mean, I told you the first time I met you, a lot of my friends don't like connecting with what happened, especially
yeah.
with their ancestors. And I want to say with a lot of their ancestors because they believe that they did the wrong thing. And so because they did the wrong thing, they detach from that. With yeah, and with the detachment, what happens is there's an escapism of the
Mm-hmm.
responsibility. And I feel like that's where a lot of my friends in the Western world, especially, have refused to take responsibility. We can talk about I'm not a colonizer or I don't approve this. But the thing is that you have to first
Mm-hmm.
heal because whatever you're carrying, like you say, there are things you know about the UK. The UK, British
Yeah.
colonized Kenya, for
Yeah.
instance, and they did the concentration camps. And I mean, my people, the Kikuyus, who were Mau Mau people, they fought. And I do know what they did. Some of the things I'm like, oh my God. But they needed to do that for themselves. But I need to take responsibility
Mm-hmm.
and ask myself, okay, there are things they did that probably if I was there, I'd be like, can you do it a little bit different? But I also don't understand the full context of what it felt like being in that space and taking the responsibility and saying they did what they could and also understanding why, understanding
Yeah,
what
their
led them
context.
there, understanding how they were treated, exactly their context
Mm,
without judgment. And I feel like it's the same thing. Even my friends from the Western world need to understand where that aspect of supremacy, and it's
of
still
course it
there. We
is.
can
Yeah.
see it. I won't even lie to you. I met people who are so nice and they believe they're not. And when they're running their businesses with me, are very good a lady who was like, oh, I'm in the regenerative space and I'm trying, to bring us together. And when we were having a conversation and I was telling her, because I told her, you know what? One of the things I refuse to do is I refuse to continue with the patterns that I have seen where African people are paid less and yet doing the same role as everyone else. And so I told her that is one of the reasons I will not allow myself to get into spaces. If we do not agree on that,
Yeah,
I
because
am
what you're
okay
saying
to
is that
go.
she was almost like perpetuating
And
that
and
colonial dynamic.
yeah, and I remember we were having a conversation and one day she asked me, do you want to be paid like a European? And I was like,
I want to be paid what I'm worth.
exactly, because it's a service. If you're buying a pen, whether it's in Kenya, whether it's in America, you would buy for the same. If it's $2, we would all buy it at $2. No one goes and says, oh, this pen, because Africans don't have enough money and we pay them less, this pen for them will be 50 cents. Never. No one will I ever go to pay a plane ticket and someone goes like, oh, Joy is from Kenya. Oh, they're paid 10 times less. So let us just make the ticket. No one does that
Yeah.
for me. And so I have to stand up, and for some things I believe, and unless we're willing to say, okay, there are certain patterns, and probably I also need to check myself. Because even for me, I won't lie to you. I at some point believed I couldn't make it, and unless I had someone from the Western world to help me.
Yeah, because you've internalized.
And I could see it. I could see. Yeah, but the problem is I'm saying one thing on this one side, but I'm realizing the system keeps on shifting me on this other side, because then I'm realizing I'm never gonna succeed, because that's what starts ringing in my head. I'm never gonna succeed. You're never gonna get funding. You're never gonna get this. You're never gonna get this. And I was like, even if I work with someone, because I believe in collaboration and I believe we are all the same and we all need each other. And I'm a strong believer that the intention behind why I do what I do is the most important thing. And that's what I would ask my Western people. Check your intention before you say something, before you make a decision, but also understand where it comes from. A lot of it, you're carrying it from also your ancestors, because we have a gene. A gene is a thing that carries everything we have been born with. And like the Africans say, the person you're seeing seated here is not just Joy. It is my grandmother, it's my aunties, it is all those people who are living right through
I
me.
absolutely love that.
And some of the behaviors you will see expressed from them, and not so much from me. It's from them.
Yeah, and the key thing here is to,
And that,
as for myself and well, really for everyone, it's to step back and reflect on what patterns am I perpetuating. And I think the really interesting thing here is that probably so much of this is unconscious to us. As you said, even for yourself, you had to check your own, why am I talking to myself like that? Why am I assuming that about myself? And it's a whole worldview transformation. And I know that's not easy. But I know we've only got like a few minutes left, but looking ahead, based on everything we've discussed just now, like what gives you the most hope for the future of business and I guess a general transformation in Kenya and Africa more broadly?
I think what gives me the most hope in this season is the disruption we are seeing. Is the breaking of systems with us being so uncomfortable. I am so, in all the weird ways, I am so grateful for what the earth has brought onto us, the universe has brought onto us. And what I mean by that is all this disruption that is making us question. Look at me and you seated here together, questioning the very things if you found us 10 years ago, we'll be like, no, this is how the system works. You can't go any
we're like
other
prodding
way.
at it saying, hey, this is broken.
And I've met, exactly. And we're like, no. We have to perpetuate this very system because it was going to benefit us in some way. And we would have, and I know for me and you, we probably fought for some of the systems. And the amount of people and young people I'm seeing getting to the space of questioning
That's
is
so
amazing.
lovely to hear.
The number of people who, yes, like in Kenya, it has gotten to a point where I'm seeing something we did 10 years ago in civil society, and we didn't think it would ever happened. And I remember like the constitutional review, when we changed our constitution from our colonial constitution, I tell people, I think we have one of the best constitutions in the earth. But the thing that happened is we thought it would take us 40 to 50 years. But in 10 years, people are doing what we predicted would happen in
That's
50, 40
so,
years.
that just gives me so much hope.
People are already questioning. Yes. And also the other thing is people are starting to go back and question, why were our indigenous society doing better than we are? And what can we learn from them?
It's actually about,
because I believe there's a strong,
sorry, there was a bit of a delay. I was about to say it's actually about not building new things as such, but actually in a way looking back at what wisdom we've sort of lost due to colonialism, and almost like readdressing, hey, no one's really doing very well in this current system.
Exactly. And so for me, that gives me hope, because I'm seeing a lot of that. And I know spiritual people call it awakening, regenerative, we call it all these names, but it is a space of emergence. It is now, like Bio says, it is a time where we are seeing the cracks, and we are conscious about the cracks, and the light is starting to kind of pop into the cracks. You know how if you have a house, if you know the houses that then have holes and then you can see the light starting to come pierce through, it's so beautiful. And I feel like that's where we are at, because what will happen is that those cracks will start bringing in
That's
new light.
beautiful.
And that's where I feel we are. Yeah. So one of the things I'm actually doing that is very interesting, an interesting project I'm doing that is fully aligned with allowing us to hold space, is we are co-authoring a book. And we are saying it's a book, but we are hoping it's a living system in itself, because we hope people will take it up and things will start emerging, but they'll be able to utilize it in their context. So we are creating a book called The Seismic Questions, How to Live, Living the Questions. So ideally, the idea is that we need time to question, and those questions then start bringing in new systems, new ideas, because they're different realities. And unless we're willing to sit in that part of asking, what is the other reality that we can have from this way we are living, then we won't see any other opportunity. So that's one of the interesting projects I'm working on currently. I'm so excited
I can't wait
about
to read it, at least the first version,
yeah.
before it becomes this new living system. And so, yeah, for the book itself, as and when it's ready, please share and I can add it to the show notes. Is there anything else, like any other way that maybe
I will.
any listeners can work with you or can kind of learn a bit more about you?
Yeah, actually, I'm starting to become more serious on social media. I'd taken a break.
But you need the breaks to question.
And so now I'll be sharing. Yeah. And also because even with the book, one of the things we're doing is we'll be holding events, because we'll be holding spaces where we can sit and question together. And so we are collectively co-writing the whole book with people who come in and creating events for those who will not want to write, but they just want to sit in and just, listen to what does questioning look like. I'm questioning this part. How do I sit with it? So we're going to be holding such spaces. And then the other thing I'm also currently working on is we're going to have the donut event, global donut event, which will be happening in October. And so we're starting also to prepare early about it. So if anyone would love to participate, please just reach out. That would be nice. And also just in any way, just share ideas, just because I'm also still trying to figure out. A lot of us are still trying to figure out anything. I'm always on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. And currently I'll be going to Substack also, because I feel like that gives a lot of, yes. So I'm actually working on that. And yeah, so that's where I am. So then if anything emerges out of that, you will find it.
Thank you so much, Joy, for being here today and for just giving us space to both question things and to, like you say, we don't have all the answers. We're just exploring how we can do things a bit better. So thank you
Yeah.
so much, Joy.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. It is always a delight just having moments to sit and have this conversation and also to have
Yeah,
more
thank you so much.
conversation. Thank you. Yeah.